You guys, it's 5 o'clock, so I think I will call the meeting to order. Right, the first item is any additions or changes to the agenda? Anybody?
Other than Jared not being here,
Right,
so I should probably strike number 3 off the agenda.
yes, we're going to move the attendance policy item that was number 3 on the agenda to the next meeting, just so that Jared can be here to present
Is that unanimous?
Yes.
what he prepared. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. All right, the next item is to approve the minutes, and I think that Arian had a couple changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a couple,
I had a question about that. So when things like that happen after they've already been submitted, do we want to just wait until this meeting to send the final version instead of sending Bob 3 different versions? I sent them Tuesday morning. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Does that sound
I
right?
think we have to approve the minutes and any changes and then do a final submit. Yeah.
my apologies for being late on those minor details, Kirsty. I will do a better job of being more timely with that. I would say, I would say we don't need to, I agree not sending 3 versions to Bob, but maybe if it's okay to send the notes to you ahead of this meeting, if there are some suggestions, is that all right?
I think that makes sense if that works for everyone else. And I think they were good catches because I was definitely off on the number, so I appreciate that.
Oops, what happened?
Not sure.
Oh,
There we go. We're good. Oh, there they are.
so Arian, do you want to just enumerate what those changes?
Yeah, so just one was on they mostly had, there were 2 of them that had to do, or actually 3 of them that had to do with the notes of the costing sheet that Rick put together. And it was just under project costing. There's a line that said property 64 East Hill. And now that I'm seeing that, it's actually 68 East Hill, and 266 Main Street combined should be 600K, not 6 million.
Yeah.
And then right under that, the estimate for the price on 266 Main Street is 65K, not 37. 37 is removing the trailer, which is on the next line of the notes.
Okay,
And then another one under the totally different section, project updates, under NEPA, NEPA. I would suggest striking the last sentence that has NEPA, because it talks about a NEPA study, and a NEPA, as I understand it at least, a NEPA study, quote unquote, doesn't exist. NEPA is the review process.
Okay.
So those are my suggestions.
I just want to ask how was the draft minutes emailed to the group?
Yeah.
I did not receive it, and it could be because I was going to bring this up. My last name is spelled Pereault, and frequently the second E is dropped, so I may not have gotten it.
Uh-oh, yeah.
But I've gotten other emails, so I just.
Do you have the drive?
I just opened the drive, and I'm sorry, Liz, could you say it again? I can get it fixed here. It's your.
Yeah. It's L Peralt, LPERREAULT.
Yes,
Okay.
yep,
Wrong.
that you are correct, that E was missing in the
Okay.
version on the drive. That's fixed
Okay.
now.
Thank you.
okay, sorry about that.
That's
I'm the one
okay.
who typed that up.
I've gotten other things, so I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was a
Okay.
email also that was missed.
Okay,
Now I got your email right, because I didn't do anything.
I don't know, some of them, somewhere along the line, it was right, but it's an easy,
hey, John,
common mistake.
Yep.
we were just reviewing the minutes and making a few changes. Were there any other changes, Arian?
That was all I had.
Okay, John, do you want to know what the couple changes to the minutes about dollar amounts and such? All right,
Just typos.
yeah, so all in favor of approving the minutes of April 17th?
as
With
amended.
changes. With the changes, yeah, as amended.
Aye.
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 It's unanimous.
Cool, okay. So we're gonna move to, we're skipping over the attendance policy because Jared's not here and he'll present that the next time. So we're moving on to reports from the work groups and we thought it might be helpful for us to give you some, just to review some of the goals that we were charged with by the select board. And so I'm just gonna read through them as sort of context for the reports from the work groups. So our charge was the goals of this group were to rehouse those affected by the floods of July of 2023 and July 2024, provide additional affordable housing amidst Vermont's housing crisis, include a mix of single-family homes, multiplexes, tiny houses, and apartments, revitalize the town, prioritizing flood displaced and other Plainfield residents and those who have made significant contributions to the town, restore lost tax base, expand the water and wastewater user base, determine a timeline according to what makes the most sense logistically, ecologically, and financially, place infrastructure as early as possible so that buyers can design and construct homes as early as possible, have the project be cost neutral to the town, and create public, common, and open space and paths that enrich the lives of Plainfield residents. So having provided that context, I'm gonna turn it over to Rick.
I'm writing them all down still, to make sure that I stay on task.
Okay,
John and Liz and I met. I had asked Mary Truris if she wanted to be a part of our group. She declined. She said she wasn't sure how she could be helpful to our group. And so, as I suspected, there aren't going to be that many people interested in going into the nuts and bolts. Just us nerds over here. So in terms of cost savings and considerations, as I mentioned before, the cost estimate, we went through it in quite a bit of detail. So John and Liz could get a sense of what that cost estimate is and is not right now. So they could have just a crude sense of where we are as we start to dig in and decide where we go next. So I thought that was kind of important so that somebody else understands where we stand with costs and what it means. We came up with a number of cost savings ideas, and if I miss any, please correct or add on to my thoughts. But one was add or reconfigure the lots, potentially looking towards the wetlands, the hill, or what are now currently designated as public spaces as additional lot placement. One thing that has not been brought up yet to this group with that much detail is that the site does not balance, meaning that there is material leaving the site. So it's a cut site, and cut means you take material away and you truck it off somewhere. We talked about potential ways to make the site balance better. So we still need to bring material which is different in for the roads, but where we remove and put new material in, we have an abundance of material. So finding a way to waste fill on site was one thing that we talked about. That's going to take some technical expertise, and as we mentioned before, we may not want to go too deep in that until we have other more general discussions, but one that's maybe a big one. Another one that I think we talked about last time is the construction duration. We have some disagreement between the cost estimates as to just how long a project this was. Optimistic was 3 to 4 months. Pessimistic was more like 10 months of construction. Time duration of construction adds cost. And if there's a way we can shorten that time frame, it'll be better for all concerned, especially the neighbors. Tell me if I'm saying anything wrong. We also talked about potential volunteer labor as a cost savings method. We've got almost $100,000 in there for OPM, owners, project manager, and a clerk of the works. Those are potentially, with good qualifications, something that could be done on a volunteer basis if we could get groups of people or individuals to take that task on. And they'd have to be qualified and the board would have to want to do that. So it's not really our decision, but we see that as a possible way to save money.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
What is an OPM?
owner's project manager,
Oh,
so,
okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yep. The other thing that we noticed, and I hadn't really thought about this before because I was just thinking about it in terms of process, but the sewer lines and water lines are stubbed out to all the individual lots. So that means that that as the sewer and water is being constructed, we're building in the sewer and water connection to each individual lot. So it has a shut off and then it goes onto the property line. Now, it makes perfect sense from a construction sequencing because you don't want to build a road, then dig it up as soon as somebody builds on it. But the question of who pays for the cost and how came up in our discussion. In other words, should that be a part of the overall project cost of the town, or should that be a part of the lot cost? So that was a discussion.
And in some of my analysis, I saw stub fees basically per lot at $3,000. Some of the historic paperwork has shown that.
So good, you're already thinking about that. Great.
I can provide a little background on that. It was determined that the cost on a per lot basis to do after the fact, as you said, Rick, would be more than twice as much. And so if the lot costs were, because by code, they will all have to have water and sewer on the land. It's not like it's an option. Doing it as part of the construction process and increasing price per lot by 3,000 was considered to be an overall net win for affordability because of those cost savings. So that how it does raise lot prices, but from an overall economic standpoint, it is better for individuals who are purchasing the lots. That's the thinking in the historically why that is like that.
That's great to understand. It was one that I hadn't even dug down into yet, Aaron, so thanks for.
Yeah, it's exactly like you say. Why would you want to bury it and then dig it right back up again individually? Surely there's got to be a better way.
Dig a hole.
Dig a hole, fill it in.
Yeah.
And then the last one was sort of the cost of the path and potential costs to light the path was discussed as well. And I think that was the list that we came up with, but we were just taking a first cut through all the costs. Liz hadn't even seen the overall cost sheet that we talked about at the last meeting, so we went through that as well. So that's kind of as far as we got. We aren't necessarily going to take a whole lot more steps until we can get a holistic direction from this group as to what we should do, because I don't want to dig into something that might be cost estimator intensive.
Yeah.
And then change it later on at increased expense. So we'll look for this group to tell us what we should do next. We do have a bunch of questions for the town potentially in terms of the cost estimate that we probably could look into, and we don't have to decide this now, but one is sort of the project insurance cost. We need to understand what the town's risk is with this and how it deals with builder's risk, if any, and what all of those look like. And so that's a potential issue. I think we've talked about water and sewer pipe size before, just making sure we're clear on that. And then also, I don't think it'd be a bad idea at some point to do a hydrant flow test to make sure that I understand from John that there's really good pressure in that area. The question is there good residual pressure? And that's a firefighting issue that relates to some of the code things that I think we need to understand, because it does affect pipe sizing, as I understand it. In other words, a larger pipe will support more flow down the length of line because there's a body of water stored in that pipe. If you make it smaller, but it's under greater pressure, it may be able to take on the necessary burden of firefighting. And then additionally, Arian, you'd asked me to reach out to Michael Bingham about curb cuts and just make sure that I understand what he's asking for. So, that is another thing that I'll be doing here. That's a list of some of the town things that I think we collectively need to do, and I just want the group at least to nod to us and say, yeah, that's a good thing to look at, or no, that's a really stupid thing and don't do it yet.
It's a very good thing. I have another potential town question, which is how do we negotiate or handle the portion of this field that is open space and owned by the town, and how does that square financially with lot sales, and what's the cost share, if any, in those lot sale prices for that town-owned land?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
So there's open space that
Yeah.
will be owned by the town, so the town presumably would purchase this current lot and parse it out, and then there would be some retained open land that's mostly wetland that can't be built on, but
Mhm.
could be an orchard and common space and green space and whatever. And I haven't seen any kind of discussion about how that balance would happen between who pays for that land.
I think the lot sizes need to offset the entire purchase, which pays for that land, does it not?
Yeah,
So yeah, so if the lot costs are paying for the land, essentially, people who purchase the lots are
lots
gonna
of
buy the
grants,
land
whatever,
and then not
yeah.
own it.
Yeah.
So that's a question that factors into the lot cost essentially, and its affordability.
well, I think if we're going to honor the neutral
Yeah, that's
piece, then it would have to be factored into the lot.
gonna have to be
cost.
factored into all of it. So I
Yeah.
think we just need to, I would like to highlight that balance and
I don't know that if that necessarily would fall to our group to figure it out. I think it's more of a holistic question at the overall.
it's not a
budget.
build out, yeah.
Another one that I think is a holistic budget issue is a payment of taxes during the process of selling the lots.
Right.
What is it? How much is it? And who pays for it and how?
Right.
And I'm not sure how that works because the town would potentially own the land, and so I'm really confused by that concept in my own mind.
Right. Or there's a grand list loss while it's not happening, either way, yeah.
A small one, yeah.
I don't have an answer. I just have a question at this point, I guess, John.
Nope, that makes sense.
Wasn't one of the other questions we had, and maybe you said it and I missed it, Rick, was the cost for having a lawyer to, when it gets down to the sale of the lots, we'd have to, for closing and all that stuff, is that part of our budget, or is that part of?
That was in your budget, but we thought it was low, I think, is what we were. talking
Okay,
about.
that's right, yeah.
That
lawyer
was
fees.
part of our discussion, that's correct. I think the concern was the legal cost, the complete legal cost for the project, going forward for, just all the way through from a real estate standpoint, what would that be and how would we establish a budget for that? That was unclear to us.
Yeah.
But it seemed, you brought up that you thought it was low, given some other things.
Yeah,
There was also a surveying cost that you brought up, John, that seemed low to you.
Yeah.
It's a number that I think has come forward with the project, but I guess I would just have to understand what is involved in the scope so that we could get a good number on that.
And that brings up another question in that your numbers include the entire project cost, but not all of that is build cost. And does our group really need to deal with that, or does that need to be in a larger budget
Yeah,
that is taken
right,
care
we're
of?
doing
You know?
that. There's a
Yeah.
crossover.
I think that's really that's a good question of where do we park these cost issues so that they aren't done twice, but they're done once and they're done at the appropriate level, whether it's project cost or overall project budgeting.
Mhm.
One more update. I talked with Paul Bovier, I believe, since the last meeting. Have I talked about this yet? I don't think I have.
I don't think so.
Talked with Paul and he has sent us map coordinates for the revised wetland boundary So we have that at this point. He confirmed that he'd be willing to continue with us on an hourly basis as needed for amendments to what was our first phase of engineering work.
Mhm.
I told him we don't have anything right now and updated him as to where we are.
Right.
Okay, and just to clarify, he's the engineer from Engineering Ventures who was working for, during this phase one, part of looking at the engineering.
It is my family's history and tradition to start a story in the middle, so thank you.
Just to give the background.
I appreciate that.
All right, was there anything else? Anything, Arian, that you,
I just, Rick, on the legal and the surveying, there were like quoted figures for those that have breakdowns. I don't know if that made it to you, and if it didn't, I can dig it up and forward it about where those numbers came from. Is that something you'd like me to send to you? Do you have that?
No, I don't. think
Okay, okay, I'll put that, I'll dig
That's
I'll dig those up, and because they were provided by the lawyer, and we did get him to quote on a per lot basis for closing, for the actual closing transaction, which is nice because, you know, the exact final number of lots is not really known yet, so that was, I think, a good way to do it. And then the surveying, there is a formal quote on that that I think does assume a certain number of lots, so that may be subject to revision, but I can send you the detailed breakdown on those. And just as a reference point to one of your questions, I'll also include this as the property tax bill. The current bill on that one property is $4,500 per year. Of course, that's subject to, we're going through a massive reassessment process right now, but the likelihood that it changes, you know, we're all supposed to end up with similar tax bills after this, but we'll see how that plays out, right? But just as a reference.
I'm sorry.
Arian, that'd be really helpful, because I kind of wondered when John was talking about the surveying, to what extent it would just be a bit of a formality of setting the monuments at the end. It'd be fairly simple because everything would be laid out, or whether a full layout would have to be done. And that was, you know, if you've got backup on that, that'd be really helpful. It would.
Yep,
Because
yeah.
Fairly simple survey.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I think this was a full layout done by survey, is what's proposed in there. But you know, let me find the real document and send it to you so that everybody's looking at the same thing. And
Cool.
that was prepared by Rick Bell, who has done surveying on the property already, is a local surveyor, you know, reasonable guy, well respected.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Rick Bell.
Bell, oh yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
This may not be part of our scope of work either, but I've been thinking about the sale of the lots, the actual salesmanship of selling the lots. Is that going to be the work group's charge, or is there going to be a professional that's actually going to
A realtor.
a realtor to assess the actual value and you know, list it and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
That's probably needing to go through that process, an official realtor process,
yep,
hired by the town, I would assume.
So that will be a cost
Y-
somewhere, whether it's an hour work or.
I think, you know, one of the plans that we're supposed to deliver to the select board is a sales plan for how that is supposed to work. And there was, I think, as we've discussed somewhat, there is some additional legal research that's needed in terms of how we might best prioritize certain people who were displaced by the flood or potentially displaced by the flood and or live in Plainfield, and what our options are
Yeah.
to legally sort of do that. So I think, you know, all that is definitely within the scope of work, but I think it's a really good question, and that I think we need to come up with an answer for.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, Rick, you all good? Okay, great. So moving on to the prospective buyers work group, which Walker is on, along with Jared, Birchmore, and Kim.
We have not met yet, so I don't have anything to say yet. So I'd like to punt it to the next meeting if possible. I wasn't able to really hit my emails in the last 24 hours properly.
Okay,
One note is just on that is that the folks who have filled out the prospective buyer form online, I did send a BCC email because those folks haven't sort of consented to have their information be public, but I did send an open invitation for them to respond to me and Walker if they were interested in participating in a group to get the thoughts. I think to my knowledge, there's only been 1 or 2 people that have responded
There's
so far.
Yeah,
But you know, not that it needs to necessarily be a whole group, but it's nice just to those folks to know that they're invited. And I think one of the things that that Lauren and I have spoken with Walker about this, but also we spoke with Donnie, is that defining and as best we can what constitutes affordability, because as we look at that list of things that were supposed to be our goals of this committee, coming up with a standard that, particularly from the prospective buyer group, but I think also that feels good to this group, of what affordability is. And there obviously are published standards out there where affordability is 30% of area media income and the like. However, those are usually all-inclusive standards of housing. And so how does land price specifically factor into that? I think is, you know, more than just, there's some math involved, but it's also more than just a math exercise. And so if as a real question to float out to that group, if they could come back with how we define affordability for our group, or a proposal for that, that would seem very helpful, just so when we're evaluating all the options, we know whether we're actually targeting the right thing in all the trade-offs of stuff.
Would also, it be a part of affordability to know what percentage of the lots should be made affordable? Is that an issue to get at as well?
I think it is an issue because I think I remember Karen Hatcher saying if we were going to
Yes.
apply for the community development block grant DR, that there would be some specific requirement for, I think she said 30%
That's what I
of
had
the
in my notes.
lots to be
Yeah.
affordable.
Yeah.
So I think that's another way to look at it, is what is the balance of lots, because you know, we may have to have some lots that are more expensive, that are not quote unquote affordable in order to make the whole project work.
But is expensive due to size or due to price? Because. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's my question.
you know,
Right.
The
it's-
small lots are actually pretty, I mean, they
They're
can be pretty
inexpensive, but-
affordable.
Yeah.
But more expensive than other lots at that size in other towns
Right.
historically, but relatively affordable. So that's
Right.
the big question, is like, how do you define it?
I mean, you know, price per square foot is more fair, I think, because if you want a half acre,
Yeah.
it needs to be an affordable price kind of
Mhm.
thing, rather than, oh, I've got to buy a small one to afford it.
Right.
Right.
And then the other weight there is like, for the lots that have wetland, how do you price out the
Right.
wetland square feet that can't be built
Right.
on?
Well, that's where I think we have to really look. So I think what needs to happen is the property needs to be assessed properly by real estate agent that knows how to assess such things. And then we take that number that is what is open market price, and then you deduct whatever it is to decide, you know, what that price would be to be affordable.
I mean, Erin can point to this because there's been
There've been two appraisals.
appraisers in real estate.
But then we need to have that in writing
I
and
read one
a
is
quote.
375. What was the other one similar?
Uh,
I think Arian can mention.
wait, per
No.
per lot?
this is
The-
per lot.
The per lot price assessments were based on sitting down with twice with Tim Haney, who runs Haney Real
Yeah.
Estate in Montpelier.
Yeah.
You know, whether we can commission something more formal in writing, I think is a question. But that's how the initial pricing was sort of, and it was based on lot size, and that led ultimately to the current price configuration, which basically prices it out per square foot. But I think there's some real good variables that are, have just been listed in terms of, well, if somebody's got, a bunch of land that's wetland, how does that impact them? And, or how does that impact the pricing? So I think having a clearer layout for some of that is definitely, there's a few details to iron out essentially.
And also just another thing to consider, when was that initial appraisal done? Because a lot changes, the market changes consistently. And
Right.
so if it's been a year, we might want to go through that exercise another time to have the formal numbers.
I think the last time that was done was in either late February or early March, so not all that long ago.
Okay.
But it's a good question because obviously, I think things are in a state of flux in our economy, maybe more
Yeah.
right now than they have been in a while. So seems like a reasonable caution.
Yeah, and affordability really is we can make what we can affordable potentially, but building a house is a whole nother thing. So there might not be, and that's not something that we have much maneuverability on,
Right.
unless, there's some kind of more streamlined building process for these lots with
Yeah.
some kind of, like Huntington Homes or some larger contract, like the Middlebury project.
Right.
Mhm.
One thing to say with specific to, while I think the grant criteria are an important criteria that we need to keep our eyes on because we definitely want to meet that. I think some of the discussion around lot pricing and affordability may be a little bit separate from that because if we do move down a direction where we have, just folks will recall, we have some significant interest in this project from folks like Habitat for Humanity, from folks like Downstreet, from folks like that they are interested in actually purchasing lots and putting either single family or duplex homes on this property. All of this is they're significantly interested. It's subject to the project actually happening, and then they would have to get their own funds together. But this is the business they're in, and they do this. So some of those, if we did have something, let's say we had 40 lots, if more than 13 of them were one of those two options or something similar, it gets us a lot of the way there in terms of meeting that grant criteria. So and so I think the question of lot affordability is related to that, but we may want to parse that out even finer for what we think is the right number for Plainfield.
Yeah, and in terms of what you said, Walker, about the cost of actually building, I think one of the things that Sandy Vitzum had wanted for the prospective buyers group was to organize some kind of a sort of fair or exhibit of different home providers to meet with the prospective buyers. And I know Karen Hatcher sent me a video a couple days ago that was about a housing project in New Hampshire where a woman who was an architect and her husband was a partner and a construction expert, and they put up a village of tiny homes, and they talked about all the ways that they had cost savings for those, which included, putting foundations in all at the same time and that kind of stuff. So I think that's something that the prospective buyers group could look at.
And I think in a way that could, if there's significant cost offsets in the building end, and if that's like an organized and streamlined process, that might potentially, I would think, could help offset a higher lot cost if that's our infrastructure bill.
Right, and could also make the lots more attractive to people.
Yeah, like
knowing
if you're
that
coming
they-
into a build system that's,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's.
That's
not-
what I was
you're not on
thinking. It
your
would
own.
be
Yeah.
easier to sell the lots if you could. I mean, that's what contractors do.
That's
They
what-
have spec houses
Sure.
and you can pick between A, B, and C.
Right.
right,
And if we could, I think that that's a smarter way. I think we would sell more lots that way. I think that it would give the buyers an opportunity to understand what they're getting into.
Right.
Building a house is not, it's a interesting project.
It's a very
And it
interesting-
costs a lot of money, and there's a lot to it that people don't even think.
Yeah.
The toilet actually has many pieces that you have to pick.
Say anything?
Well, we have a time for public comment at the end. Erin, what is the procedure?
I think, you know, we don't have a clear procedure other than we're inviting general public comment at the end, but I think we can, you know, depends on how busy it feels to you as the chair, I think.
We're
Yeah.
not too busy. Go.
No, go ahead, please.
I came to the meeting because I haven't been following things very well,
Okay.
but in this area, and in Plainfield in particular, there's an enormous wealth of information here among people here about affordable housing. What works, what doesn't, what local builders have built more economically.
Mm-hmm.
That was really why, you know, I've been a builder here for off and on for 50 years. Well, we learned a lot 50 years about what works and what doesn't,
Right.
Particularly here. So I'm just saying that's an amazing resource that's here. I don't know. We're much more likely to get affordable housing out of what this community has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
The habitat model. I live at New Hamburger. That's probably the most affordable housing development anywhere around here.
Right.
We learned a lot of things building that over 50 years, and we also learned a lot about what not to do, for example.
I've been in some of those houses.
Mhm.
So I just think there's a process which people have learned here, going back maybe to the 60s, about how a person can have housing in a world in which housing is much too expensive.
Thank you.
Knowledge is here somewhere.
Yeah, that's a
I
really
would be
good
much,
point.
I myself would be much more interested in something that that sort of grew out of that knowledge than Huntington Homes, which to me is an example of how not to do it.
Mhm.
Well, it depends on who you talk to, but yes, I think you're absolutely right in, you know, leaning on the resources at hand. And maybe you would like to join the, that working group with, Walker that's looking into that and bring your, perspective to that group.
Or provide a list of resources or contacts that you think that group should be in touch with.
Yeah,
That would be super helpful. I mean, I
Yeah.
know that there
What's
is
the name of that group?
It's the
It-
planning or
prospective buyers
prospective buyers.
work group, which is a work group, you know,
Of this
subgroup
committee.
of,
of
yeah,
this.
Essentially, it's like that group is looking at, okay, once the infrastructure is in the ground, what do we do?
Yeah.
How do we handle the third phase of it all? Building it, designing it, making it cost effective, and that group hasn't really gotten started, but we have to rev it up now.
And there were a number of groups that, I can't remember the name of the group, that Michael Billingsley, who's the emergency coordinator for the town and has been working with a lot of people, he was in touch with a lot of volunteer groups, like the Mennonites and
The Methodists too. wasn't
there were,
You know,
there's
there's all
another
different
group that I
missions.
can't remember the name of that had offered to, you know, help build. I can't think of their name right now, but anyway, and then there were people who, like, for example, I have neighbors on my street that are in the process of building 2 tiny homes on a lot, and they were willing to share their expertise and their experience and their, you know, their resources, the information on their architect, all that stuff to help other prospective buyers. But it'd be great to have a list of your resources. And do we need to have your name for the minutes? Just
Yeah.
because you,
Sampler.
oh, okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
It does seem like in the course of, from the very beginning of the idea of this project, this kind of thing has come up a number of times, but it seems like it hasn't quite caught, like the wave hasn't broken onto its own, you know, to have its own inertia or whatever you call it. But oftentimes when it comes up, it is under the, you know, this isn't just limited to this project. This isn't helpful just for this project. Having of source of information on how to build efficiently, affordably, how to, make your home more resilient to the weather is something that would benefit the whole town. And so having this as a separate entity that really isn't limited to people who are prospective buyers, but is in the interest of making housing, affordable housing, safe housing, accessible to all of Plainfield, and is maybe one way of looking at it. And there also might need to be a little bit of a firewall between exactly what this group has the capacity to do and not do. It might be that this group can really do a lot to set up the resources for, let's say there are 3 or 4 people who get together because they realize they could save a lot of money if they all laid their foundations at the same time. If they had similarly structured homes in proximity within a new neighborhood, but maybe this group doesn't have to totally do the work, just really help set up the resources and do everything we can to connect people to.
I just worry that we have a lot of lots to sell. And I worry that it has to be attractive and easy because, we could sell many of them, I'm sure of it. But there's a lot and so it's just, whatever we can do to make this, if it moves forward, that it's successful and achieves what we need it to achieve. So, but yes, you're right. We need to keep it in scope
Yeah.
for sure.
As
Yeah,
an
another thing. Oh, I was just going to say, one thing that the prospective buyer group can do is maybe have really try to monitor not just the interest, but the very serious interest in buying lots to try to, know, do we have to worry about being able to sell all the lots? Or is there more interest than there are lots to go around? Is that interest sincere?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
right now, I think we had a list of about 50 prospective buyers. And I've actually heard from a couple other people who hadn't put their names on the list yet. But I think there are some people on that list who will have to drop off because they're gonna need housing sooner perhaps, or they may not wanna wait until this project is done.
Yeah.
Or the expected money may be higher than they expected.
Then
That's
they
right.
thought, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I really, along these lines, I think just keeping that idea out there, maybe of a housing fair, or some sort of little
Yeah,
event we
I
can
like
hold
that.
in the Opera House does, and obviously any and everybody's invited if, even if they're building a house in Marshfield or something, there's no reason we should turn them away. But that seems really positive if we can come up with a clear game plan for that.
I think a lot of people would be interested in that.
I do too.
Yeah, that would
Like-
bring the
like
full
Kim was
Plainfield
saying,
yeah,
it's
culture
good for
back out.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, well, I think we can move on to the next report, which is Arian for the budget.
And
Okay.
by the way, I have to leave at 6. I apologize. I'm driving to Baltimore, so I'll try and pitch in in any way I can on this one.
Gotcha. Well, hopefully we're going to end early tonight. I did bring, we met as a group, which was me and Lauren and Walker, to just look at a couple things around the budget. And basically, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes for that. If I could just get all my windows open. What we had sort of said is, let's look at this let's develop 3 to 4 funding scenarios. It essentially hinge on how much grant funding we can come up with. And, does that mean, is that, $1 million? Is that $2 million? I think I did want to report that Karen Hatcher's preliminary evaluation of the CDBG-DR funding, the Special Disaster Recovery Funding, which was the draft plan was released by the state on Monday. Plainfield is discussed explicitly in the scope of work and damages, and so she believes that we are, as a town, eligible. As discussed previously, the town has a lot of needs. Karen's initial reading of that document does continue, as had been mentioned previously, that it really emphasizes housing and infrastructure for housing. So there is going to be a conversation that we as a town will have to have. Probably will start in the grants committee and will involve the select board about how we would structure a proposal and what we would prioritize as a town within the parameters that the state has framed this grant. So for this project in particular, it does seem like the framing is fairly beneficial, but ultimately that will need to be decided by people beyond the scope of this committee. However, hopefully we can get a sense of how much funding we might be able to actually show up with. But the goal is to develop a couple different funding scenarios. The levers that we can pull on here, just to be very clear about how we can, as we try to meet costs with revenue. Rick already mentioned, increase the number of saleable lots, which would decrease common space and potentially take more wetland. The other thing we can do is charge more per lot. We've talked about affordability being a concern, specifically part of our mandate, figuring out what that means so that we have that as a target to hit. Those are kind of our mechanisms. The other thing that is relevant to this conversation is that some folks have heard this, I'm sure already. The legislature is considering a special kind of TIF, which stands for tax increment financing, that's supposed to be easier for towns, particularly for infrastructure projects around housing. This has passed the Senate, and I understand it's in the House, and advocates for it are optimistic it will pass this term. That is pending. It's definitely not a given, but it is something that could be a mechanism that may be relevant for this project. And as just a little background, TIF stands for tax increment financing. What that means is it allows you to borrow against future tax revenues based on improvements. I would say that using this mechanism does eat into one of our mandates that would be restoring tax base, because this would be borrowing against some of that future tax base. So that is something that we want to be cognizant of. But it is also both from the fact that here's our stated goals, but also that this mechanism does exist. So, all those things, even in the tension that they exist in, it's good to be aware of.
Also, do we have you're doing the FEMA buyouts. Do we have a semi-accurate number of our grand list loss?
So
Factor into that number?
That's a good question. The number that has been said by the listers is 11%. If everything goes through, that includes other property that's already been abated that is not part of buyout. So I don't have a more detailed number than that.
11% is a more firm number than it was about a year ago, or half a year ago, or whatever.
That's still the best number as I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something that I think should be a number that we think about when we talk about TIFs, because if we're expanding our tax base, but recovering from an 11% loss.
Mm.
You gotta get that 11% before there's a
Anything
Yeah.
charge again.
Yeah, it's a
That's right,
difficult,
yeah.
it's a difficult thing. I mean, I think, one of the considerations in balancing that is what's the time horizon that we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So we mentioned in the meeting, I think we mentioned 20 years was some kind of horizon. for
yeah.
those plans.
So I think we want to acknowledge that there's definitely tension with potentially using that TIF mechanism, which we don't even know is a real thing because it hasn't actually passed the legislature, been signed into law yet. But I think it is one of those things that we may need to evaluate if it's if it's use some of that money or do nothing. The long-term advantage may be to do something, but that's a decision of this committee. Just in terms, we do have a lot, we've got a big gap that we need to bridge. And I think we just need to be realistic about all the means that we have to do that. And I think, looking at those priorities that we've been given is how we need to analyze those trade-offs to make the best recommendation that we can, assuming that we can even develop one.
Right.
So we
Yeah.
have, just to backtrack, we have grant funding, we have potential TIF, we have, then on the revenue side, we have lot sales, which is kind of our last, whatever is remaining of expenses just need to be sopped up by the lot sales to remain cost neutral. And we have lot numbers.
Oh, we have
Yes.
questions.
Oh, we
Sorry.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, we have questions up there.
Oh, yeah, whoops, that's, you wanna, Alicia, do you wanna? ask-
Yeah, this isn't a question, but for some reason I'm unable to enter something in the chat tonight. Don't know if it's me, don't know if it's been turned off. But in case folks are interested, the bill to which Arian is referring is S-127. And the current version of it, passed out of the Senate as of today. Is, with the strikeouts and the amended language is on the website. This is actually previously my understanding from attending the city, League of Cities and Towns advocacy meeting is in the past they've been called TIFs. This is now being called CHIP, which to me makes it sound like a kids health program, community and housing infrastructure program. But I think it's worth a read. And people seem very confident it's going to get through the House's bipartisan support. So if we had a chat, I would have just posted the link and the bill number. That's all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. There, I do have I don't have I thank you, Alicia. I do have this web link that I can put in the chat. We'll see if it works for me. That seems like it posted, that this is just the overview of the program from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And I'm happy to send that link to Kirsty for the notes. And I can see if I can find the actual S-27 language.
Yeah, that's certainly worth a read because it's not a small bill.
Yeah.
There are lots of omnibus bills that are being packed together and sort of like a Christmas tree. Everything is being hung for it, particularly pieces people want passed. But if you go to the state legislature's website and you just put in 127 and you go to documents, you'll see the latest version.
Right.
I'd post it if I could, but I can't. I don't think.
Yeah.
We've got
I
it.
have it, yeah.
Yeah, we
You
have
got
it.
it? Okay, good.
Great.
Thanks, Alicia.
So that's kind of the budget update from the budget group. Again, we're going to meet to come up with some different scenarios, probably interfacing with Karen Thatcher and the grants committee about what seems realistic that then on the revenue side, and the goal is to make the revenue equal the costs.
I think like the takeaway from that meeting though is that this will have to have grant funding to go
Yeah.
forward, to be feasible. Like this is just going to have to, and potentially almost any infrastructure build in any town in Vermont is gonna have to have grant funding, which I'm sure people
Yeah.
are.
I mean, that is why that TIF thing was also being such a big proposed thing from the legislature. I know if you look at that Vermont League of Cities and Town website, they have a huge number of community infrastructure projects that have been proposed for which funding is problematic. And so they're kind of just trying this as an additional approach. I think there's going to be we'll have a proposal that we can pencil out relatively easily. Here's what lot prices would look like if we had to cover all expenses. And I'm sure that everybody in the room there and online will say that's not realistic for people to pay that. But we should do it for the exercise, just so that we know.
Just to let the
Absolutely.
group know, I'm
Yeah.
working on a model, I'm working on those
Yeah.
scenarios to model them out, and the math isn't totally done yet, so I have to go through with a fine tooth comb, and then we can.
It's a very helpful spreadsheet though to see how changes impact lot prices across the board, both in cost and funding. So I do think it's going to be very useful just to play around with different things.
Absolutely.
It was interesting to see just when you flashed on that website that it said that there were 35 towns that were currently proposing housing projects. 35 municipalities that currently have plans to build, oh, sewer systems, okay. Sorry, municipal water or sewer. But I have been following in the press. I just read, I think it was yesterday or today in the Caledonian Record that there's somebody in Lindenville who's proposing building some housing there. And there's the Middlebury program that's going on, which is, I think, 150 new houses. That is all, I believe, Huntington Homes.
Yeah.
They partnered with them.
Yeah, and you know, there are a number of other ones, so I keep reading
I-
about them and trying to keep track of them because I think they may provide some insights for us.
I also, I mean, from a personal perspective, as like coming from that, my dad was a builder and, but I like the idea of Plainfield being able to like marshal its resources and do this
Yeah,
in a really beautiful way. In a cost-effective and beautiful way, and not necessarily relying on a place like Huntington. Home.
sure.
That's just my personal like.
Yeah, obviously, you know, it's great to have goals.
Yeah, yeah. It's
But it's
it's not necessarily a realistic goal.
And be open to other options.
It's also up to
Yeah.
a lot of buyers.
It's also
Yeah, yeah.
totally up
What they
to
want
them.
to do,
Yeah,
so.
they can go
yeah.
any
Can you
which
go
way.
under that, just so
Yeah.
we can
I
see
guess
everything?
the thing that I struggle with about that is that it may be cheaper to do it other ways, but we have, if, as I think you were alluding to, Kim was sort of saying, no, let's not get in.
Liz,
I was backwards, yeah, sorry. Kim was saying, let's keep the scope limited, and
Yeah.
Liz was saying we may be able to enhance our cost profile with this. We would need some sort of a partner because the
Yeah.
risk would
Exactly.
just be too great to the community to say, oh yeah, we can volunteer to do,
Mhm.
pick a number, 20 homes. That's beyond the scope of the town to volunteer and do simultaneously. And so I think that there's maybe we need to consider risk to the community as well as cost to the community when we think about these things. And I don't know where to come down on it.
Yeah.
I just think it's a factor.
Yeah.
I thought I heard Kim volunteer to take care of it.
I didn't think we heard her say no.
I think we have a project manager.
All right, are you good on the budget?
I'm good. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Yep.
Okay, just one question, when I saw Karen's email about the, you know, the fact that she thought Plainfield was fully eligible, but is there anything about timing, more on timing about that CDBG DR money? Cause it seems like it's been, I don't know,
And
whether,
that's been a question in my mind
Yeah.
is how long do we have to do our work before
Right.
we're losing out on this stuff?
No,
right,
here is, I'm gonna read an email from Karen, that talked about the draft plan for the CDBGDR funds. That there is a meeting next, or on May 6th with the grants group with, both folks from the Central Vermont Regional Development Council and a couple of folks from the state, Pat Moulton and Christy Farnham, about how to present options to the select board for consideration. And then sometime around mid-May is going to be the end of the 30-day public comment period on the state's
right.
draft. There is going to be probably a May 26th presentation to the select board. The final application guidance will be issued in June, and then sometime in July, the applications will open. And my understanding is they will be funded sometime in the fall, or sometime in the fall, which I think they're going to open in July. So this is happening, but it's not like it's happening tomorrow, thank goodness. And I think we'll need to interface with the grants group on that, and probably hopefully have Karen visit on some of that. And I do participate in that grants group. I think folks from the housing perspective and buyouts. So that is the kind of process. I think I would also mention, in case folks didn't see it, that on May 5th at the Opera House, there is going to be an update from the grants group just on all grants group activities. I believe that's at 6 p.m. and I would encourage everybody from our group to attend if they can.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be 6, I think 6 to 8.
So let me get this straight in my brain here. This committee can't apply for a grant, that's a given. The town has to, so, but this project needs to be going on to apply for the grant or approved. So we've got to have the public vote on whatever
Before
before that. So there-
that sounds like it
Right, am
makes sense.
am I, okay,
You know, we'd have to check.
I think, yeah, that's an interest, that is, I think that's a good question to have specifically with Karen.
Yep,
But to ask that, to make sure that what the order of operations are there, but but it's a very good question, John.
yep.
About what cart goes with what horse in what order.
When's that meeting? I'm sorry. I
May
missed
5th.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's a Monday night.
It
so-
is, yeah.
And I know I can't make it that night.
Okay.
but, all right, well, so shall I move on to the next agenda item? So the next agenda item was to set a tour, date. And I mean, I'm assuming that probably weekends are better for people.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm sure we have to get Bram's okay on that since he owns the land. So is there any particular time that is, I mean, Arian, that would work for you and for people on the committee and also.
I'd propose like a Sunday afternoon sometime.
Okay,
If
and
that's
does
possible.
somebody need to be there? I mean, who would be the best person to sort of lead the tour? Is that you or are there any?
I'm happy to commit to doing that.
Okay,
Is there,
well, we don't want to do it on Mother's Day, I don't think.
yeah.
I have other
Yeah.
plans.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a weekend afternoon, Saturday or Sunday or midday. I don't know, any of those times work. I would say if sometime in the next couple weekends might, obviously not Mother's Day.
How about the 10th, Saturday, the 10th?
That seems good to me. How does that seem to others?
Yeah,
And what time?
Do we want to say, like, is that I mean,
Is
I
it
would say
best-
anytime between 10 and 2.
I vote 10.
Yeah, I would say 10, because they don't want to have the whole day sort of, interrupted, so. And it would probably take, what, an hour?
Yeah, and I think if people want to stick around a little bit longer, they're welcome to, but if we planned on it being an hour and we meet at the park and ride, I think we would need to warn that as an official meeting of this group, and I'm happy to put that out there in all the spots.
Okay,
Yeah.
The last time we walked up that hill from that side area, and it was pretty treacherous, is it better?
I think we should put a note on there that says wear boots if you can.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it is springtime, right?
Walk right through you.
Yeah.
We're not gonna be home.
I mean, I was up there a couple weeks ago,
Okay.
wasn't bad, but, I definitely think you want to
Walking through
wear,
the woods, though, some people need to be prepared for that.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you usually want to wear the right clothing and.
Yeah, you want to wear boots, and it's ticks are out there, it's real. So
Yeah, in fact, Laura LaPierre found a tick on herself that day, so anyway, so we can talk further about how to, publicize that. I don't know if you're thinking it's open just to the general public or anybody who wants to come.
Yeah, what do I think? I mean, I would think we just have it as an open invitation, anybody who wants to join, unless anybody.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will just note here that the communications work group did meet, but we didn't put that on this agenda, so we'll have to report out next week, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, the next question has to do with just, we received a letter from Betsy Ziegler with some questions and concerns about the project. And I think that was circulated to everybody on this advisory committee.
Donnie circulated that to
Yes.
everybody's email, but that may not have gone to Liz, right, as we found out her email was wrong.
I think I did get that, but I think I wasn't able to open it on my phone, and to be frank, I forgot about it and didn't, when I was on our home computer, didn't try.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's okay. So the question really was more about, I mean, obviously, I think the question is more about just as a general rule of thumb, how does the group want to respond to letters, you know, things that we receive? Obviously, there's going to be probably stuff on social media as there was, you know, before the town vote. And the communications committee did sort of, I think the general feeling was that, you know, we definitely wanted to acknowledge the receipt of the letter, which we're doing publicly tonight. And the communications committee is comfortable in drafting a response to Betsy if other people are okay with that. But just in general, you know, do we want to respond to every letter that we get, or, you know, how do we want to deal with
I
this?
think first off, we need to make sure that we have either a single voice or a single point of contact to do that, so that we're not all trying to reply and maybe with different opinions and that kind of thing.
Right, obviously, yeah, we would have to run it by
I
at
mean,
least
other
the,
organizations I'm a member of, that's the policy period. You don't answer that kind of thing.
sure,
It's this
Of course.
person's job or this group's job to deal with it.
right, yeah. Does everybody feel okay about that?
I just
Yeah,
have a
that sounds
question.
really great.
Not that I disagree with that at all. I think especially when we're being contacted formally, that we
Right.
defer to the group, but I think, you know, I think we'll all find ourselves in situations where we're in conversation.
Of course.
And I think that we just have to, yeah.
It's just
Say it
that
in
that
the-
random Plainfield people post that, you know, gets all of our wrinkle up. It's like, it needs to have an official.
Yes.
Not.
We cannot, yeah, I think anything social media needs to be thoughtful and strategic. Because it can go badly quick.
Yeah, I know, I would just, Lauren, I know that you handled the, you know, when we were just an ad hoc committee, you handled a lot of the communication. And one of the things that I really appreciated about that was you tried to tease out what questions were about, you know, in terms of just what's a concrete question that sort of has a factual basis, and can we respond to the question rather than getting caught up in different emotional arguments.
Yeah,
And I think,
so
yeah.
well, what I tended to do was just to use it as an opportunity, in some cases, to research the answer to the questions, because we didn't necessarily know all of them.
Right.
And then use it as an opportunity to enhance the FAQs that we had on our website, and also to release information sort of in general from the group, rather than, you know, getting into a back and forth with every individual who had an opinion or asked a question. Because it just seemed like it was a better use of everyone's time, and it also sort of de-escalated, you know, personal conflicts. So that was kind of the strategy that I used. It was not always easy to do, but I think, you know, we do have a communications committee, and I think that is kind of the conclusion. Kirsty, correct me if I'm wrong, because she was on the call the other day. Kind of the conclusion that we came to, and so.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it being important to just acknowledge the person that we received contact, so thanking them for raising whatever points they raised, if they had resources that they thought were important to share with us. Like if they raise a question about something very specific, ask who they would like us to connect with about that topic. Yeah, and then everything else, I think Lauren already said.
I mean, there was, I think another facet of this was that we wanted to make sure that, I think it would be good if we, when recirculate that letter, just to make sure you got it, Liz, or whoever, just to make sure that everybody on the, on this advisory committee is understands and has answers to some of the questions that Betsy asked, because one, for example, had to do with the area around the park and ride, the public water supply there.
Mhm.
And it was a concern that she voiced, and we had been in touch with Tristan McGregor, I think his last name is right, from the water department previously about that. And he had sort of indicated that he didn't see it as a problem. But we got a more extensive response from him a couple days ago that I have. Did you want me to read that, Arian?
I think it's good because it's definitely one of those things that I have heard a lot of concern of lately, and that was a sort of a newer question. Just one thing that just backing up for 1 second though, I'm wondering if if it would be reasonable or a good idea for the communications committee to review the FAQs that had previously been published, and within the context of we're now an official committee of the town.
Yes.
We're sort of living in a new budgetary reality, to go through and just to say, I know that I got a request from Carol Smith,
Yeah.
assistant town clerk, that some people in town don't use the internet, are not comfortable with the internet, and they go to the town clerk's office to get that information. So I printed off some maps of the land and the existing FAQ, even though it is somewhat outdated, and gave the copies of that to Carol just so she had something. And I know if there were some new documents that were issued by this committee that could be made available at the town office in addition to the internet, that certainly some people in town would appreciate that.
Yeah.
So just a note there. But that said, yeah, I do think it's good to read that little note from Tristan, just because that is a more recent concern that's been brought up.
Yeah, and I will say it's a part of the plan to review the FAQ and make sure that they're not only up to date, but is there anything that could be some more appropriate for this iteration of the committee?
Right. Yeah, we discussed that, and so we're
Great.
kind of on that. But anyway, so what Tristan said is, and Arian, can you just clarify before I answer this? What is the thing that is there that, like, is there a physical? It's like a,
Well,
It's a well. There's a couple of wells that are there, and they're like bigger versions of the wells that are in people's yards that are out of town.
okay, and it's across from the park and ride?
It is it is west of the cemetery and sort of north of the rail trail. If you go to the far end of the park and ride from Main Street and you go down towards the river, you'll see them there.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So what Tristan said is a source protection area, SPA, another acronym, exists around any well or spring used for a public water supply. The SPA is created to show areas that likely have an impact on the water supply of that source. The SPA is broken down into 3 categories. Zone 1 is the area immediately surrounding the source, and any sort of activities or buildings should not be done in this area. Zone 2 is farther away, so will not have as immediate an effect. So some activity and construction can happen in this area, particularly the farther it is from Zone 1. Zone 3 is the farthest area that may contribute to the water supply, and most activities can be done in this area, though heavy industrial or other intensive uses should be evaluated and curtailed as needed. The village expansion project location falls into Zone 3, and parts of Zone 2 farthest from the water source. Construction of residential properties or simple commercial properties that are connected to town water and sewer in that location represent a low risk for potential sources of contamination, which is known as PSOC. So that is Tristan's comment on that particular issue, which I think the communications committee has begun to draft a reply and will incorporate this particular piece of information.
Yeah,
That's
that
correct,
answer's
right?
online now.
Right, yeah,
Great.
and Kim also added that to the FAQs. So, okay, well, I think that's a good plan, and I think we would propose that really the communications committee probably deals with any direct communications, and, you know, in some cases, we may want to circulate our draft reply to someone, you know, in a wider group, just to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with it, and
if you've got points for specific well, I'm speaking well today, specific subcommittees they can be your resource to answer some of that.
Right, yes, of course, because, yeah, and some of the questions and concerns that she had really, I think, had been previously addressed in the FAQs or, you know.
When you guys are ready for the new round of FAQ revised, I think it'd be nice just to really circulate that to our whole group, because I think all of us are going to get answered a lot, or going to get asked a lot of those questions, and to, some of them
Absolutely.
are pretty well researched at this point, like that specific comment from Tristan. I think it's like, well,
Right.
here's from the guy who runs the whole system. This is how he looks at it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right, yeah, we'd also talked about transitioning the old website maybe into, a new, yeah. Or
Onto the town website.
onto the town website, yeah. All right, well, I guess we are on to the public comment section. Just wondering if anyone has a comment online or in the room. Okay. Well, hearing none.
I've
then I will-
got one thing to add, just since we're all here. Back when we were talking about what constitutes an affordable lot, because it was mentioned that Karen Hatcher was seeing certain demands for affordability. I just popped her an email saying, are there any standards for what determines a lot's affordability? And she said, I'm passing you on to Pat Moulton. So there's a thread out there to see if there's anything written down on that.
Okay,
No reason to reinvent the wheel if it's already. taken care
right,
of.
they've already defined it.
Exactly.
All right,
Right.
well, I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Mhm.
All in favor?
Right.
Aye.
Great.
Cool.
Nice.
Good job, Aaron. You did get out early.
I thought there was a chance, and I want to, you win some, you don't win them all, but hopefully you win some, right?
And I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this computer. Is Keith supposed to come back in here?
It's supposed to go, that and the owl are supposed to go,